You are. Thanks so much. Good afternoon and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Cabinet meeting of the 6th of June 2024. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and chair of the meeting as the leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. We will be using the Council's hybrid platform, and so the usual reminders for us that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Also a reminder to participants in the chamber, or participants, that those in the chamber should ensure their microphone is not activated when not speaking, and that remote attendees should mute themselves when not speaking to avoid any background noise or feedback. Anyone who wishes to speak should either activate their request to speak function or their raise hand function. And finally, we're only using the chat function to highlight any technical issues or to get the attention of the Democratic Services officers. So that's the announcement for today. We can move forward on to agenda item 1. That's apologies for absence, and my understanding is that we have everybody either in the chamber or online, so we don't have any apologies. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of May 2024. Can I take those as an accurate record? I'll move.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. And there's no dissent, so they're passed. Agenda item 3 is to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interests. And I'm not aware of having been advised of any. I can't see anybody indicating. So
no, Chair, there were no declarations of interest for this meeting.
Super, thank you. And then on to references to the committee, and we've got quite a number of those today. So we'll move forward onto those. Agenda items 4 and 5 relate to the Oracle Fusion implementation, and we've got references from the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 17th of April and the Governance and Audit Committee on the 20th of May, and so we've kept those to consider them both. It's worth noting that we do have a reference that will be considered under part 2 later on the agenda, because that includes some commercially confidential information. So if we have a look at the two references, first of all, if an overview is that the report that was under consideration presented a very thorough and open dealing with the lessons learned for the organisation. And I think it's fair to say it was a highly challenging implementation of the Oracle Fusion Finance and HR system. The report, as I said, has been considered by both scrutiny and governance and audit, and I have to express my thanks to committee members for the time given to the report by both. I actually attended both in person. If I'm not mistaken, the scrutiny committee was about 3.5 hours, and it was a really in-depth discussion. In terms of the actual report that was under consideration, there was regular reporting on the progress and costs of the implementation, and a commitment made that a review would be undertaken once the system went live. That review, which is the one we're looking at now, was a little later than anticipated, as there was a need to first resolve a contractual dispute with the system implementer. The system has cost significantly more than originally planned, but I think if you're reading the report, you can see that there's no single reason for this. A large contributor, though, was an initial underestimate of the complexity of the implementation, and so I think it's fair to say the initial cost estimate was not realistic. It's worth having a quick look at the time frames involved. Is that actually this was first notified in early 2020, and I have to say there were some other things on everyone's minds at that time. with a warning that the system was going to cease to be supported in December 2021. So a business case was put forward in August 2020, but it became evident that we weren't going to hit the go live date, which was originally scheduled for January 2022. So most of the additional costs were involved in that delay, some of which was actually planned. It's worth noting that there have been numerous similar instances in the press in recent weeks relating to the implementation of this programme. Another Welsh council had a planned implementation of 4.8 million and eventually implemented in excess of 12 million. An English county on the south coast had a similar plan and has had to re-implement with a final forecast costs of costs in the region of about 40 million. So I think it's fair to say this has been a problematic programme for a number of councils to look at. There are a number of recommendations that we've considered, and it's important that we're a learning organisation and we've got arrangements in place to continually review projects and share learning. We know we've got an extensive project management toolkit in place, but we need to review it and raise awareness of it and undertake training within the organisation to embed its use. We need to be sure in terms of schedules of works as part of contracts to ensure clarity of responsibility for the council and for the contractor involved, and we need to understand the level of risk of projects right from the outset and ensure the necessary resources are identified. But it is important to note that the implementation has been successful. There may have been delays and there may have been an overspend, but the council now has a sound, robust finance and HR system in place, which will serve the council well into the medium and longer term. So the next steps is we've actually already been sharing the results of the review, both internally, but actually with other councils, because I think there's learning for an awful lot of other local authorities in terms of the lessons learned on this. So I think that there were a multitude of comments, as I said, in that 3.5 hour meeting with Corporate Performance and Resources that go over 3 pages on there, and those were forwarded on to Governance and Audit as well. Some of the comments that they've come out with in terms of their recommendations was that they were going to refer it to Governance and Audit and then on to Cabinet, so that will come through via there. But the comments that they wanted us to consider is that it was important that council take on board the lessons learned. Well, yes, we are, and those are going through various committees, etc. That we make sure that we share the report with Ardal, who are at the procurement partnership that we have with the local authorities. There was one about going forward, there should be better and earlier communication to elected members. Well, I think you'll have seen that when we had the report on WICIS recently. And I know that members felt when that was considered that actually they didn't have enough detail because it was too early. But I'm sure that will come back to members when there is more detail. So it's important that they have that early. The council needs to improve its skill base and IT literacy of its staff. Well, that has not only been done, but it's also continues. And there was a query about needed to look at building teams focused on project management. Yes, and we are developing we've actually got quite a successful project management team, but we are looking to develop that. And there'll be more news about that soon. But I think it's important to note that we need to develop those, but in terms of skills, we need to make sure that we have the right technical expertise. So you can't say, well, we're going to implement IT, and we'll have a project manager that is skilled on managing potholes or something. So we have to get the right technical expertise as well as the right project management skills. And it also then said the need for the council to look at its organisational capacity for new projects. That is a big conversation for us to have, because as a local authority, as we know, we get round to budget setting, and we have to balance our capacity and how we're going to how we're going to manage to deliver our plans against the budget we have, and what we are prepared to ask local residents to fund. And that is always a very difficult discussion, and I hope that we can revisit that when we revisit the budget discussions this year for the committee that put forward that recommendation. I do need to just make a slight amendment to the report, because the report actually said, you look in hang on, I'm just finding it now. Yes, if you look at paragraph 1.4, it actually says the new system finally went live in April 2023, 2 years later than planned. And I do have to amend that. Actually, that was 16 months, but I think it's worth noting that about 4 months of that was a deliberate decision, because we decided not to implement in the Christmas and end of year period, because we ran the risk of having major discrepancies between the old and the new system. That proved to be the right choice, because when we did go live in April 2023, it was without issue. That cost us more money, but that was actually a deliberate decision that was taken in the autumn of 2022 to say, no, we don't want to take the risk. We don't want to leave our staff maybe not being paid properly and things like that. So that was a decision. So it's a 16-month delay. Not acceptable, but we need to be accurate. So those came off the Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, and then it went to Governance and Audit, and again a very good discussion. Councillor Hooper said that he was glad that there were independent lay members. Yes, I am, and independent lay members who have expertise in risk and project management, etc., and welcome their insight. I think that there was a comment on the reduction in council resources being something that had impacted on the project. Well, that's exactly what we were just talking about, is that there are balances. And I think we need to understand that if the council feels that there is a necessary course of action, that we have to be prepared to put the resources behind it. The chair commented that it was clear that the council at the start of the project didn't have the necessary expertise, I would say expertise stroke resource in place to successfully implement. And I think that was initial, and he said that the initial projected costs of the project of 1.5 million was insufficient. And I think that is accurate. I wasn't involved in the discussions at that time, but looking at the reports and in hindsight, yes, I think that we should. So again, we probably would have been budgeting for 3 or more million. The chair added that it was important for the lessons learned to be cascaded throughout the council, and I would say yes, and other councils, and we are actively doing that. We also have been supporting another council who has had challenges in implementation. There were questions about what had been learned in relation to risk management within the council. I think, again, the report outlines that. And there will be a piece of work undertaken with heads of services and directors in terms of sharing the lessons learned and that the council will go further in the training being delivered around the use of project management. So we've got the recommendations from the first committee, and then in terms of governance and audit, they've put forward a range which includes that projects could be impacted if council doesn't have adequate resources and capacity, that members of the public required greater accountability around challenges that project faced, and greater scrutiny should have been carried out. I question in terms of timescales how much more and the circumstances, but I think that the baseline is that anything we do should be open to scrutiny, so I will take that. At the start of any project, the council needs to ensure that it has the right expertise in place, including commissioning, human resources, information technology, finance and legal. I think that goes without saying. The current budget for the Oracle system appeared insufficient as it did not include archiving. But I think we've already said that the initial proposal for it, the initial business case was probably understating the need for resources and finance. That the Governance and Audit Committee and Corporate Performance Resources Scrutiny should have been made aware of issues sooner. I think the timescales involved are actually laid out in the report in terms of the governance of the decisions making. Lessons learned should be cascaded. Well, that is happening, and there should be a workshop for members to understand how the 59 recommendations would be implemented. Well, I think that is, there's no kickback here against it, but that would be something for the scrutiny committee to organise, and that obviously would feed into. So they're fairly straightforward. So I think on those we would thank them for their deliberations. Some really helpful comments. Most is in already happening. So I would move that we note the recommendations contained in both references, and I'd move.
Okay, and I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. And no comments, so that's fine, that's agreed. So then we'll go on to two references that are related to reshaping, the next phase of transformation, both of which are going to be covered by Rhiannon. The first one is agenda item 6 from Voluntary Sector Joint Liaison Committee on the 29th of January. Over to you, Rhiannon.
Thank you. So the reference from Cabinet for the 18th of June of this year was presented by the Director of Corporate Resources, who advised the report set out the proposals for next phase of the Council's transformation programme for reshaping, which is the transformational change programme launched in 2015 and enabled the Council to mitigate the impact of austerity whilst delivering significant financial savings. There are still significant financial changes, and so it's now time for reshaping to be refocused, and the report set out a framework and early ideas for progressing transformational change and the 5 themes of the target operating model, which are service transformation, strengthening communities, digital innovation and economic resilience, and the target operating model. Cabinet had referred the report to this committee for consideration. The Director of Corporate Resources commented it was important for the programme to have a more financial imperative, and in particular to look at how the Council operated the organisation, how it uses technology, and how it met the needs of its residents. The Chair asked whether the Director envisaged this to be proactive or reactive, and in response, the Director said in reality it would probably be a bit of both, stating the Council was always open to approaches from community groups, but welcomed discussions with them going forward. And the Chair advised that in her experience, community groups and organisations have good ideas, but do not necessarily know they can approach the Council to have these discussions. And obviously an awareness raising strategy is going to have to be put into place to encourage these discussions. Representatives from the voluntary sector in comments advised that they were pleased to see that the Council was looking to streamline the process going forward, and she would be looking for consideration in regard to the services that could be considered for further involvement by the third sector. The director said he did consider the current year was the most challenging year ever financially with the council, which wanted to try and protect the services that mattered the most to the residents. And it was now an opportunity for the council to think differently. The council had a willingness to work in this way and to undertake considerable engagement with the sectors as it worked through the programme. So in conclusion, in light of the comments, it was clear the committee welcomed the approach to transformation, it being acknowledged there would be a proactive and responsive approach to engagement. So it was agreed that Cabinet be informed that the committee welcomed the intention to streamline the community asset transfer process. The third sector was welcoming the opportunity to work more closely with the council in relation to the service transformation approach. So I'd like to move that recommendation.
Thanks, Rhiannon, and I'm happy to second that one. And there's no dissent here, so that's agreed. So moving on, it's over to you again for agenda item 7.
Well, it's not going to be very different because obviously this is a report that went to both of the committees, and this cabinet report set out proposals for the next phase of the council's transformation programme, reshaping. Again, we're trying to mitigate the impact of austerity and deliver financial savings. So it had the same ideas of target operating model, service transformation, strengthening communities, digital innovation and economic resilience. And this is part of a process of engagement with all of the council committees, forums and networks, so that as many stakeholders could be involved as possible. So Cabinet has recently considered work being undertaken to strengthen Vale of Glamorgan communities in response to a series of National Audit Wales reports on tackling poverty and a local report on how the council worked with the third sector. The council had engaged Compass to work collaboratively on a programme of engagement with council officers, elected members, the third sector, town and community councils and social enterprises to address the recommendations in these reports, but also to assist in the development of the new Vale of Glamorgan Corporate Plan 25 to 30, a revised town and community council charter and a new voluntary sector compact. So the director took that chance to thank those town and community councils that had engaged with Compass work to date, because this work will not only help the Vale's work to tackle poverty and the cost of living crisis, but would inform work across all of the council's critical challenges as set out in the annual delivery plan. And the report on this strengthening communities theme work will be brought back to the committee in future. There then followed lots of contributions from various community councils to discussing how community transfers had taken place and could take place in the future and looking for stronger cooperation. That point was made by several representatives, and it was felt that the council would be working very closely with the strategic leadership team to ensure that the council delivered on the reshaping framework and would continue to engage with town and community councils to understand the best way to approach discussions moving forward. The chair of the committee kindly asked if the representative could email them regarding grass cutting contracts, which had come up from a number of representatives. And they were subsequently agreed that both the cabinet reference and the appended report be noted, and the comments of the committee as set out within the minutes be referred back to cabinet for consideration. I'd like to move that recommendation.
Thanks, Rhiannon, and happy to second that. So yes, it would be good to discuss more about community asset transfers and partnership working with local organisations and town and community councils, won't it? So that would be good.
Thank you.
So thanks for that. Everyone's happy. Yeah. Agenda item 8 is another reference. That's from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 24th of April, and that relates to work to tackle poverty and the current cost of living crisis. And I think it's fair to say there's been a tremendous amount going on in terms of cost of living support, and it's not just as simple as whether we, food pods and food banks and which tend to hit the headlines, but it's also the warm spaces hubs, the just information on websites, the council's value in the Vale volunteering scheme, but then there's things like the home insulation, energy efficiency that's been completed, as well as discretionary housing payments. And the report also provided details about how the cost of living reserve, which was established back in 2023-24, had been used, and that was also very constructive. It's been quite amazing that with the help of so many local community organisations, that a fairly small amount of money has gone a long way towards supporting people in our communities. There were queries in the discussion about council's effort to help rural communities work with social enterprises, the work around the Older People's Champion and council's age-friendly team, as well as the work of the council's housing team with council tenants. That we are as a council keen to continue with schemes to help tackle the cost of living crisis. There was discussion about whether or not free school meals should be continued in the summer holidays, but I think in the absence of funding, that's something we have to think very seriously about as to whether or not we actually do have available money. I'm not totally sure where the actual total left in the reserve is, but it's not a huge amount. But there's also things like the Welsh Benefits Charter, etc. That's also helping. The committee itself recommended that they note the Welsh Benefits Charter, Welsh Child Poverty Strategy, the use of the cost of living reserve to support those in need. They supported and endorsed that future reports on the cost of living work should be reported to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, and that the format of the report be revisited to address the comments raised by committee to make it more accessible. There was also then the recommendation that Cabinet considers continuing the provision of additional support in the school summer holidays to those in receipt of school meals. And I think that on that one, we have to say that it will be considered alongside other potential measures going forward in terms of the cost of living crisis, which sadly continues. So if we can note the comments of the committee, all the other things are for them, and that I said we say that we will consider the recommendation related to free school meals alongside other possible measures in cost of living. So I'm happy to move on that.
And I'll second the recommendation.
Thank you. And everybody is in agreement on that. Just going on to agenda item 9, which is more of a sort of an internal type report now. It's a reference again from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on 24th of April, and that is the required learning review. The report was presented by the Head of Human Resources and Organisational Development, and it was in relation to the training that we require our staff to undergo. Either it could be required learning or it could be mandatory learning as part of workplace compliance. So the report sought to highlight current provision, but also it mentions or discusses how the council seeks to comply with regulatory requirements, mitigate risks, and also to address emerging challenges. More recently, the council brought in a new whistleblowing policy, and of course, we want to address the recommendation brought from the Governance and Audit Committee in relation to whistleblowing, which was the need to strengthen employee understanding and awareness, along with a willingness to report issues around whistleblowing. And finally, the Head of Human Resources and Organisational Development emphasised that workplace compliance was part of a more rounded review of the induction process. And that hopefully helps staff understand or have a greater understanding of key areas of the council. That would include the corporate plan, the annual delivery plan, the mechanisms of staff communication and the democratic process. And that's quite important, because in a recent Estin inspection, it was actually quite mentioned about the culture of the organisation, the constructive culture where directorates work together, and that we have managed to break down silos within the organisation, so that where people feel that they can add to the work of a different directorate, they will do so, and so that is very constructive. The chair discussed things like display screen equipment and equality and Welsh language training, and while they're not specific modules, it is within the induction process. There was a mention of a more staggered approach being taken in order to avoid any unnecessary box ticking exercises. And you know, it's interesting. So I was having a conversation the other day about this, where sometimes it can feel as if there is box ticking. Have you done this training? Have you done that training? But if you take something like safeguarding, it is essential that any employee coming into this council is fully aware of safeguarding and the requirements of safeguarding. So we need to know that every single person, and particularly with our safe recruitment policies, that anybody going to work in a department that's relevant actually has that training even before they start work. So I think it's quite important in terms of that way. It also means is that there's a question in terms of asbestos training and whether or not that's an issue for all councils. But actually, as was explained, it needs to be, people need to understand what happens if they spot what could be asbestos. That there is a need for everybody to be aware of that. That there was a query about sort of how-to modules for ICT. I think in some ways there's a bit of a need for learning by doing, so the support's available as you're using programs, etc., as that can quite often be a more effective way of doing that. And there was a question of whether or not all local authorities undertook the same or similar mandatory training. It's not dissimilar, but I think each local authority will tweak according to its needs. So the committee actually noted the required learning review, and they asked that Cabinet consider their comments, and that was in terms of providing ICT how-to modules. And I think that, yes, we can look into that, but also the whole thing about learning by doing, to ensure that the staff induction process and subsequent required learning for staff is more staggered. Well, I think that's something that we'll pass on to the HR and organisational development team, so that they can work out the best way of doing that for staff, and to look at a joint approach with other local authorities in terms of training and learning. And again, we are already doing that, and we're working with those. So I think those are the only ones for us to consider, and I think that on the whole they're being done. So I'm happy to move that we note those.
And I'll second the recommendation.
Thank you. Everyone's happy, so that's fine. Agenda item 10 is a reference from corporate performance and resources scrutiny. Another in-depth conversation here. I know that Ruba was there for the whole lot and has mentioned lots of times in this reference. So I will pass over to you to deal with the reference. Thanks, Ruba.
Thanks, Liz. So you'll recall that I brought the Let's Talk report to Cabinet in April. And one of my recommendations was that this should obviously go to Scrutiny Committee. And then you may also recall that I made an additional recommendation that we review our participation strategy in view of the findings of the Let's Talk survey. So with that in mind, as you said, Liz, I was at the Scrutiny Committee meeting, and there was some good discussion. And it's important, I would reiterate that it is important that the council learns from the survey result and listens to the views of our residents. And in this context, it's valuable to have such detailed consideration by the Scrutiny Committee. So, for that I am grateful. And I'm aware that when Cabinet considered this matter previously, as I've said, we resolved to report on our participation strategy in the context of the results of the survey. And we hope to do this before recess. So given the importance of dealing with all the issues raised through the survey, I would like to recommend today that Cabinet notes the comments from Scrutiny Committee and asks for a further consideration to all the recommendations put forward by Scrutiny Committee, because you'll see, Cabinet, that there are a number of recommendations as part of the report that is expected before recess. So we will consider all the recommendations and references made at CPR in the report that we hope to have before recess. And this will allow Cabinet, I feel, to give the matter really informed and detailed consideration of all the issues and recommendations raised by the Scrutiny Committee, with a view to taking matters forward in the best possible way. And in the context of the participation strategy, given the fact that both matters are very much linked. So I hope today that Cabinet will accept my recommendation today. So I would move that be the recommendation for today, Chair.
Thanks, Ruba. I'm happy to second that. In doing so, I don't think I'm supposed to admit how excited I am about this piece of work, and particularly, the dashboard is stunning, where you can actually go into it and look up the results by age, by location, by area that was under discussion, etc. And I don't think that we can possibly say that we've ever got too much detail. And we're going to talk a little bit more about data and how we manage it and etc. later on in the agenda. And I think this is a really super grounding. And as I said, it's come to Cabinet before, but I think this is a bit of a step change in the way that we can base our aims and objectives on the lives of the people in the Vale. So thank you very much for leading on this. And said I'm happy to second. Is everybody in agreement? Yeah. Super. Thanks very much. Right. Say I thought I'd escaped, but it's back to me. So agenda item 11 is the development of the corporate plan 2025 to 2030, panel performance assessment and the annual performance calendar 2024 to 25. And I thought I might bring it down with me today is we seem to get a lot of these reports that are viewed as being sort of housekeeping and where the next steps are and what we're doing. And it feels like sometimes we're discussing the same things over and over again. But actually it all starts, and I'll bring this here, it all starts with our corporate plan. And this is the corporate plan that goes from 2020 to 2025. And we're just starting to develop the corporate plan that will go from 2026 up to 2030. So, or 2025 to 2030. Once we have that, as we know, that then leads into our annual delivery plans. We have one of those every year. We then have a performance calendar where we take reports on how we are performing against that delivery plan. We also have panel performance assessments where it's actually, because people say, oh, you're marking your own homework. We have scrutiny chairs, we have other directors that challenge the director in question, and they are sort of round the table discussions about performance. But going forward, there will also be peer assessments, which are independent peer assessors that will come in and talk about that anyway. So the report in front of us today details the scope and the indicative timetable for undertaking the council's panel performance assessment in the autumn of this year. And that's the necessity for that is introduced by the Local Government Elections Wales Act to provide independent external challenge to help inform the council's improvement journey. And having spoken to people that have been involved in those assessments, they can be really, helpful, challenging, but helpful, because at the end of the day, if you're not open to challenge, if you're not open to feedback, then you're not going to move forward, are you? So very keen on that. So the report, looking at it, it goes through the corporate plan development. Then if you look at from paragraph 2.8 onwards, you've got the timetable for producing the corporate plan, and that how it gets drafted, how it goes to scrutiny and back and forth, how it goes to cabinet and on to council. Then you've got the panel performance assessment, and that should take place between May 2022 and May 2027, because it's one in the electoral cycle. The panel 2.19 talks about the panel performance assessment 2024 timetable, and then paragraph 2.26 actually runs through the indicative timetable for producing and publishing the council's self-assessment report in 2024. So, this is our sort of reference guide on how we intend to not only evaluate our own performance, but actually to work with others to get an independent evaluation. Appendix A also looks at the Vale's annual performance calendar. So as I said, it's quite a technical report, but there are 5 recommendations before us today, and that's that Cabinet approves the approach to developing the corporate plan 2025 to 30 as detailed within the report. Secondly, that Cabinet approves the timetable, approach and scope of the panel performance assessment as outlined in the report, and delegates authority to the Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the leader and Chief Executive to agree the terms of reference for the panel performance assessment. With the Welsh Local Government Association, the appointments of the panel members and associated administrative arrangements. So that will be happening later in the year. 3, that Cabinet considers and approves the Vale Glamorgan annual performance calendar 2024-25 and the proposed approach to engaging with members in year to shape and refine the annual performance calendar of activities and to support members in their scrutiny role. 4th, that Cabinet considers the review findings from last year's annual self-assessment approach and approve the proposed changes to 2023-24 self-assessment, including the indicative timetable. And finally, that Cabinet refers this report to all scrutiny committees and the Governance and Audit Committee for their awareness and consideration, with any views being referred back to Cabinet. So no doubt this will be coming back to us with their views and we can make amendments as needed. So on that basis, I'm happy to move.
And I'll second that recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, we're all content. No dissent on that. Then going on to agenda item 12, and this is the Vale of Glamorgan data strategy. Back in November 23, Cabinet approved the digital strategy, and that was how we were going to work increasingly in a digital manner. But within that strategy, there was a commitment to develop a data strategy for the council. Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee were consulted as part of the process for the strategy, and in collaboration with colleagues from across the organisation, a new draft strategy, which is included at Appendix A, has been developed. So there are 4 data themes to the strategy. And firstly, that's embedding a data culture. Secondly, taking forward insight analytics. Thirdly, ensuring a robust data governance and management. And finally, designing infrastructure for data. And I think that we've just been reporting or discussing the Let's Talk About Life in the Vale. And I think that chimes really well with that as an organisation, we want to make our decisions based on evidence. And so we need to be looking at the data available to us so that we can say, well, you know, we've got difficult choices to make. The reason we have made this choice is, and we can present the data and the evidence to back that up. But also, if you're looking at taking forward insight analytics, that is about looking and almost scenario planning. What is the future going to look like? Are we prepared for that? What information is available about that? Ensuring robust data governance and management. We'll be looking at a report next on that. And making sure, designing infrastructure for data is making sure that we have the right infrastructure. And that's infrastructure to do the job that we want, but also the infrastructure to ensure that our data is safe. So those are fairly straightforward. If you have a look in the report, each of those commitments and themes is actually expanded on in greater detail in terms of what it means, so that, you know, to deliver effective insight and analytics, we will, and it goes through a whole range of things that we would want to do. So this is actually a fairly straightforward report. So the recommendations for us are that Cabinet notes the content of this report and the draft data strategy, and that's at Appendix A, and that subject to recommendation 1, Cabinet endorses and approves the data strategy as mentioned at Appendix A, and I'll move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. And everyone in agreement with that as well. I've got a hand up. So, no, you haven't got a hand up. That's all right. So, as previously mentioned, the next report, which is agenda item 13, is the Vale of Glamorgan Information Governance Strategy. And this, in effect, is an overview of the draft Information Governance Strategy, and it looks at how the council will ensure that it continues to use information by design rather than default. And that sounds like a very nifty sort of strapline, but actually it means that we have to be clear about what we intend to do going forward, not be bumped into decisions. The strategy sets out key elements of the council's current information governance framework and sets out how we intend to develop in the future. And so, you know, if you have a look, the background is quite interesting on this in terms of, if you think about it, we hold so much data, we've got so much information, and we use it in a whole load of different ways. We have some very sensitive data and that can be personally sensitive or it can be commercially sensitive. And we need to ensure that we manage that responsibly going forward. And so within the strategy, which is at Appendix A, there are three key areas looking forward. One is the governance framework, and that refers to the infrastructure which currently exists to ensure the management of information at a strategic level. And the framework in its current form is robust to provide support to the Council's future goals and aspirations. So there's more details in the strategy on that. Then you've got awareness and transparency. And again, the Council's current arrangements are well established, but given how things are changing, how things are evolving in terms of how we do business and also how the future of digital and functions, it's important that we ensure that information governance evolves too within this organisation. And it's interesting because it's not that long ago that most people used to have sort of USB sticks and they used to carry data around with them. Well, that's gone because that is just far too risky. And everyone needs to be very mindful of their use of data. And we were talking about sort of mandatory training earlier, and we do have training on data safety, etc. The third area relates to secure and safe systems, and that's with effective incident and breach response management. And that's exactly what I was just talking about, is how do we prevent breaches, but if we do have some form of breach, because people do try to breach the systems of public bodies, how are we going to manage that? And the fourth area is robust and transparent data managing and handling. And we've been developing the current structures and support as this area of information governance is one of the more challenging areas to maintain and to keep up to date with good practice. So those are all laid out in the strategy, and it's very comprehensive. We had a briefing on it last week as well to make sure that we as a cabinet are completely up to date on it. So the two recommendations for this are that cabinet note the contents of this report and the draft information governance strategy at Appendix A, and that subject to recommendation 1, cabinet endorses and approves the draft information governance strategy, and I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. And then just moving on to agenda item 14, and this is very much a housekeeping report. On top of members' duties on committees and other activities within the council as part of their role, there are also a number of external bodies and joint committees, etc., that council members and particularly cabinet members participate in going forward. Every year, normally these don't change a huge amount, but every year we do have a look and we do update the people appointed to those various committees, and they are, just double check the yes, they are outlined. The main body of those are included in Appendix A, and there are a few minor ones there. I mean, for example, there have been a few changes to reflect Councillor John stepping down and Councillor Williams taking over as group leader, First Antwerp First, and a few other committees as well, where it became more appropriate for others to take on those roles. There is on this occasion, members probably aware of the formation of the Corporate Joint Committee of Cardiff Capital Region, and there are a few positions that we need to appoint to there, which I can go through now. First of all, the Corporate Joint Committee has a governance and audit subcommittee, and so Councillor Pamela Drake is being nominated to sit as a non-executive member to the Corporate Joint Committee Governance and Audit Subcommittee as somebody who has experience in that area and is not a member of the executive. The Corporate Joint Committee also has a Regional Transport Subcommittee, and the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Sustainable Places is being nominated to sit on that committee. And the CJC also has a Strategic Development Subcommittee, and the Cabinet Member for Community Engagement, Equalities and Regulatory Services as Cabinet Member for Planning will be a member of that committee. I think it's worth noting that as part of the Corporate Joint Committee, I've taken on the portfolio of strategic development and strategic transport, so I will actually be the chair of the Strategic Development Subcommittee and the vice chair of the Regional Transport Subcommittee, although in a non-voting capacity. So I think that's probably worth adding in. But there are 7 recommendations, and they are as laid out. So I think rather than read through the whole lot, because I've actually mentioned most of them, I would move the recommendations as in the report.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. So we're through on that one, and just about to jump 3 agenda items there. You're all going to be lucky for missing out. So we can go on to agenda item 15, and that's for Cabinet Member for Public Sector Housing and Tenant Engagement on the Housing Development Programme. So over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to bring this report to Cabinet today, and I think it sort of helps to demonstrate the ambition that the Council has in being our own developer that we've previously talked about at Council level. So if I just run through some of the details here. So having been successful at the expression of interest stage and in accordance with the emergency powers decision taken on the 10th of January 2024, this report brings to the attention of Cabinet a proposal to submit a bid to Welsh Government to acquire and develop land at Upper Cosmerston Farm in conjunction with our consortium members, Newydd Housing Association, United Welsh Housing Association and Edenstone Homes. The report also brings to the attention of Cabinet a proposal to establish a limited liability partnership, LLP, with the consortium members to facilitate the delivery of the development proposals if selected as Welsh Government's preferred bidder. What I would also like to say on this is that if we are successful in our bid, the actual sort of land that we would acquire, Welsh Government actually require us to have a potential development partner deliver 50% of affordable homes on site, which is obviously something that we work towards as a local authority. It's something that we want to achieve. Ours is actually 40% for Penarth, so we'd actually be getting 10% more, which is really, really welcome, because we know the need for affordable homes within the Vale. And the land at Cosmerston Farm, requires development of circa 576 new homes. And I think if you look at the appendix on this report, you can see what the actual sort of plan, if you like, or what a visualisation of what it could look like on there. So if I move on to the recommendations. The recommendations are that Cabinet notes the proposal to submit a collaborative bid with partners to Welsh Government to acquire and develop for housing land at Upper Cosmoston Park, that Cabinet notes the proposal to form a limited liability partnership LLP with partners if selected as the Welsh Government's preferred bidders, that Cabinet notes the requirement to take formal decisions on the progression of the above proposal as part of the wider considerations detailed in Part 2 report later in the agenda, and that Cabinet agrees to the use of an urgency procedure as set out in section 15.14 of the Council's Constitution in respect to recommendation 1 to 3 of the associated Part 2 report later in the agenda. And also just to emphasise, to ensure that the Council can submit an appropriate bid to Welsh Government for the land at Cosmoston Park Penarth by the deadline of midday on the 7th of June 2024. So I'd like to move these recommendations.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm absolutely delighted to second on this, and my thanks to the officers who've worked so hard to get this over the line. So yes, big thanks. And I can see that there is no dissent anywhere. So yes, that's passed. Thank you. And then, if we've got Eddie online, agenda item 16 is contract for the provision of childcare for Flying Start in Dinas Powys. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to seek authority to undertake a tender process relating to the provision of childcare for the Vale of Glamorgan Flying Start programme. And this is within a new setting within the grounds of Dinas Powys Primary School. And we're going to hopefully enter into contract with a successful provider. The contract is to be awarded for 2 years initially, with an option to extend for up to a further 2 years in negotiation with the successful providers, subject to the ongoing award of the Flying Start grant by Welsh Government. The contract is envisaged to commence in autumn 24, so subject to the successful provider's completion of the Care Inspectorate Wales registration requirements. If you look through the report, we've got a little bit of background about the Flying Start programme. It is a Welsh Government initiative, and it provides families with children ages 0 to 3 years with a range of intensive prevention services. And this provision is high quality childcare, and it's for children for 2 to 3 years of age, and is a centrepiece of a service delivered under the Flying Start initiative. It's particularly for providing quality childcare provision for families that don't have the same advantages as many others within society. It aims to improve their outcomes in preparation for school and in the long term. The childcare unit at Dinas Powys Junior School, this is a joint project, and it'll involve, whilst it will be in separate rooms, it will be education and childcare from a new demountable building. It'll be up for 16 places for children aged 3 plus, which are not, there will be, an additional opportunity for up to 16 places for children aged 3 plus, but not eligible under the childcare offer. But at least it's alongside the other provision within the school. What's the purpose of the provision? Well, it's very, many of you already know about the Flying Start programme. The success sets a trajectory of children, improves their skills and abilities and socialisation, and an ability to play and concentrate, crucial to the long-term learning and also to participate in group environments. So it's really important that we provide those same methods of delivery to those that need that wouldn't otherwise get it. The tender process will be managed by a project group, and it includes representatives from Flying Start, procurement and commission teams. They're meeting regularly to discuss the particular development of the process, making sure that it'll follow the advertising. The process will involve tenders, completing an invitation to tender, All bidders will be asked to provide written submissions against quality questions. And interestingly enough, as part of that, providers will also be evaluating that quality through an interview process. Questions to an evaluation panel, but also the parents involved will also be involved in this as part of the interview process, and the bidders will be asked direct questions by those, which is obviously quite important as we want to make sure that the provision meets the requirements that we need. If I just go to the recommendations, then I'm asking in recommendation 1 that the Cabinet authorises the Director of Social Services, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, to undertake a competitive tender process for the provision of flying start services in Dinas Powys. Recommendation 2, that the Cabinet authorises the Director of Social Services, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, to award the contract or contracts for the service for an initial period of 2 years, with an option to extend for up to a further 2 years following the completion of the tender process. And recommendation 3, the Cabinet grant delegated authority to the Monitor Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, to prepare, complete and execute a contract with a successful bidder. I so move.
Thanks, Eddie, and very happy to second, and just confirming that there's no dissent otherwise. So, I can just spot that that Councillor Birch Rhiannon, you've got your hand up, so you wanted to come in on that.
Yes, thank you. You beat me to it. I was going to be happy to second this recommendation. It's always pleasing to see Flying Start, Sure Start programmes being undertaken, as we know, and as Councillor Williams outlined in some detail, the advantages to children who go through these programmes in allowing them to be able to access what school has to offer them in a much more effective way. And, you know, I've nothing but praise for these programmes. I'd like to see them rolled out absolutely everywhere. So I would like to second that proposal.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I will defer to your greater knowledge on this one. So so if Eddie's moved and you will second, I'm very happy to support, and as are everybody else that are around me here. So so that's agreed. Thank you both.
Excuse me, Leader, if I can just come back in. And I'm pleased that Rhiannon's seconded it. It needs to be a recognition, actually, that the portfolios crossover, and we're impacting on children and families within the Vale, and it's a combined effort for the directorates. It's a recognition. It's not just social care and health, education, which is a key feature in this provision.
Yeah, indeed, and I recognise that both of you work very closely together, don't you, to get the best outcomes for our children and young people. So thank you for that. So look forward to that. Is that going to be another visit when it's set up? The agenda item 7, and this is an interesting one. This is the proposed transfer of land and buildings at Penarth Athletic Field to Penarth Athletic Club, and this is over to Gwyn, the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Wellbeing. Over to you, Gwyn.
Thank you, Leader, very much. This is a proposed transfer of land and buildings at Penarth Athletic Field to Penarth Athletic Club. The proposal to transfer by lease land and buildings at Penarth Athletic Ground to the Penarth Athletic Club has previously been approved by Cabinet. As part of the process, there is a legal requirement under Section 123(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 1972 to advertise the proposed disposal if part of it includes a disposal of open space. Following the advertisement, any objections received should report it back to Cabinet for consideration. We have one objection, and that's been received in relation to this particular transfer, the details of which are covered in the report. Cabinet is asked to consider the concerns raised, and if agreed, recommends approval and progress and proposed transfer to Penarth Athletic Club. An additional issue to that of the objection is that following discussions with Penarth Athletic Club, permission is also sought for a minor revision to the proposed area to be leased to Penarth Athletic Club. This is a reduction in the amount of land to be leased and assists in maintaining public access. Now, in response to the objection, the Cabinet is asked to consider the following. This is the only objection received in relation to this proposed transfer. Any objection received should relate to disposal of public open space, and if appropriate, any loss of that open space. Now we come to public access, which was raised. During discussions with Penarth Athletic Club regarding the proposed transfer, the club is committed to the athletic field in trust status. This means that the athletic field will remain accessible for informal recreation when not being used for formal sporting events. Further, the lease to the club will contain specific and appropriate covenants and provisions to ensure the land remains open to the public. There will be therefore no loss of publicly accessible land. Dogs. There is a requirement at the athletic field for all dogs to be always on a lead and for owners to remove mess. It is acknowledged that this is difficult to police, and due to the resources, the council has not been able to always enforce this. The club has also stated that they will assist in the enforcement of the dog controls, as they acknowledge it is in their interest to do so. Local schools. Schools will still be able to hire the facilities at the athletic field, but will need to book with the club rather than the council, with any income being retained by the club. There have been issues at the site with private schools trying to use the facilities without booking or paying. The club has stated that it remains committed to this use and will not be looking to charge state schools, provided they do not incur any costs. Alcohol licence. The club, like many sports clubs, have bar facilities and do not rely on bar income to support their supporting activities. Compliance with the conditions of their licence is viewed by Penarth Athletic Club as a high priority, and they believe that they have complied with all the requirements over a significant period of time. The council, as licensing authority, would, as with any alcohol licence in the area, have the ability to take appropriate action if the conditions of the licence were not being complied with. The licensing enforcement team have responded to a small number of complaints from local residents since 2022, linked to temporary events being held, which have involved live music. Investigations have revealed no contraventions of the conditions attached to the club premises certificate or substantiated any issues concerning the promotion of 4 licensing objectives. Given the likely better management of the ground directly by the athletic club, it is proposed that the objection is noted, but the transfer progresses. In relation to the area to be leased to Penarth Athletic Club, attached to Appendix A and B in the revised plan of the area now required and detailed within the public advertisement, it should be noted that this is a reduction in the size of the area to be leased to the club and follows discussions with the club regarding other usage. It reflects the lease now in place with Tennis Wales for the recently refurbished tennis courts. The revised plan also assists in maintaining public access to the site, and this will also be protected by special covenants and provisions in the lease to the club and further supported by the athletic club's field in trust status. Now I come to the recommendations. It's recommended that the Cabinet notes and considers the objection received in the response to the notice published in accordance with Section 1232A of the Local Government Act 1972. but for the reasons set out in this report, progress with the proposed transfer of the land and building at Penarth Athletic Field to Penarth Athletic Club by way of lease. And 2, that Cabinet notes and approves the revised area to be released to Penarth Athletic Club. And further, that the revised plan attached in appendices A and B be now approved as the area to be leased to the Penarth Athletic Club. This is a very well set out report, Leader, and we think we can certainly make progress with this. There's only been one objection, which we've addressed the problems, which he considers, but at the same time, it'll give the responsibility to the athletic club, and I'm sure that this will save in the long term a lot of money to the council in the maintenance of the grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyn. And I'm very happy to second those recommendations. And I also think that it's worth saying that the Penarth Athletic Club has got a long and successful history in the town. And I think we quite often find that when local organisations take over facilities such as this, they actually go from strength to strength, and I really look forward to that. I don't think we're going to get them to such a level that the bars will come back on Good Friday, but you know we can live in hope. But it is a really good move, I think, and I think that it also shows our confidence in them as an organisation to sustain and hopefully improve this. So yes. Very happy to second, and everyone else is in agreement as well.
I'd just like to add, Leader, they're a very responsible group of people, both cricket and rugby union football, and I have no hesitation that they will certainly address any issues that are there, and we are there, obviously, to oversee any problems there in the future. Yep. But I don't anticipate this, and with the records that the club have used, you've already mentioned, a very successful club going forward. I would love to think that I'd be going back there on Good Friday like I used to many, many years ago when Slogger Templeman played for them. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gwyn. Yeah, so that's great. Everybody else is in agreement, so that's fine. That's agreed. So that's come to the end of our Part 1 agenda. I don't have any urgent items under Part 1. But as mentioned earlier, we do have 2 items for discussion on today's agenda under Part 2. And as these are matters that are considered to be confidential, and therefore the meeting will need to move into private session where we can discuss such matters under Part 2. Therefore, I will ask Cabinet to agree to move Part 2 and ask the Cabinet Officer to stop the recording of this open session to ensure that no members of the public are present after this point, and only allow relevant parties to remain to hear the detail of the items to be discussed. Following the meeting, the outcome of the Part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting and will advise all parties the final decisions of the Cabinet for the relevant items. So therefore, can I formally move Part 2?
And I'll formally second.
Thank you. And ask the Cabinet Officer to ensure only relevant parties remain from this point on, and for the live stream and recording to be stopped, please.